The chisel struck stone with quiet precision in the pre-dawn stillness. Tap, tap, tap. Each impact sent tiny fragments scattering across the workshop floor, joining years of accumulated dust. Elijah Vance's weathered hands guided the tools with practiced ease, carving words that would outlast him by centuries. Names, dates, brief eulogies that rarely captured the complexity of the lives they commemorated. It was what he carved on the back sides of the stone's hidden messages, true stories that helped him sleep at night. The morning light hadn't yet reached his workshop windows, but Elijah worked by the warm glow of a single lamp. Some truths were best shaped in darkness, revealed only when one made the effort to look beyond the public face. His joints ached with familiar pain. 60 years of living left its mark just as 15 years of silence had etched itself into his conscience deeper than any chisel could reach. Some stones, he had learned, could only be worn down by water or by tears. The chisel struck stone with rhythmic precision. Tap, tap, tap. Each impact sent tiny fragments scattering across the workshop floor, adding to years of accumulated dust. Elijah Vance preferred working in the pre-dawn hours when the world still slept, and judgment, both divine and human, seemed furthest away. His weathered hands guided the tools with practiced ease, carving words that would outlast him by centuries. Names, dates, brief eulogies that rarely captured the complexity of the lives they commemorated. Standard epitaphs for public viewing. It was what he carved on the back sides of the stones, hidden messages, true stories that helped him sleep at night. The workshop door creaked open, bringing with it the scent of impending rain and pine. Sheriff Daniel Mercer stepped inside, removing his hat and brushing water droplets from his coat. "Working early again, Elijah." Elijah didn't look up from his work. "Sleep and I have an understanding. We keep our distance." Mercer approached, studying the half-finished headstone. "The Henderson boy. Shame what happened." "Shame doesn't begin to cover it," Elijah replied, setting down his chisel and wiping his hands on a cloth stained with years of granite dust. At 60, his face was a landscape of deep lines and quiet determination. Blue eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little, most of all himself. "You're here about something specific," Elijah said. Not a question. Mercer nodded, shifting his weight uncomfortably. "Maxwell Blackwood's been asking questions about you." The name hung in the air like smoke. Elijah kept his expression neutral, though something cold settled in his stomach. "What kind of questions?" "About your history, before you came here." 15 years was a long time to stay hidden in plain sight, but not long enough to escape the past, especially not from a man like Blackwood. "And what did you tell him?" "What everyone knows. You're our stonecutter. Keep to yourself. Do good work." Mercer paused. "But he'll dig deeper. Man like that always does." Elijah stood his joints, protesting the movement after hours of stillness. "Thank you for the warning." "There's something else?" Mercer said. "William Harmon's daughter is back." Elijah's hands stilled on the workbench. "I thought she left the valley." "Been gone 5 years. Teaching in Helena, from what I hear." Mercer replaced his hat. "Thought you should know, considering." The silence completed the sentence more eloquently than words could have. "Does Blackwood know she's returned?" "Not yet, but this valley doesn't keep secrets long." After Mercer left, Elijah moved to the small, pot-bellied stove in the corner of his workshop. The coffee was bitter and strong, much like the memories the sheriff's news had stirred. William Harmon. A decent man who'd asked too many questions and uncovered too many truths. A man whose death Elijah might have prevented had he found the courage to stand alongside him 5 years ago. And now Harmon's daughter had returned, just as Blackwood was asking questions about Elijah's past. Thunder rolled across the valley, announcing the storm's arrival. Elijah returned to his work, the chisel striking harder now. Tap, tap, tap. The stone received his tension, his regret, his fear, emotions too dangerous to express any other way. Outside, the rain began to fall in earnest, as if the sky itself understood that something long buried was working its way back to the surface. Clara Harmon stood at her father's grave, rainwater streaming down her face, indistinguishable from tears. The headstone was simple granite, weathered by 5 Montana winters since his death. The epitaph read only his name dates and beloved father, though he had been so much more. The plot was well maintained. Someone had planted wildflowers that were now bending under the weight of the rain. Clara wondered who had shown such care, certainly not the people who had abandoned her father when he needed them most. She placed fresh flowers beside the stone, her fingers tracing the carved letters. The precision of the work reminded her that Elijah Vance had created this marker, the man her father had trusted, the man who had stayed silent when that silence cost her father everything. "I found it, Dad," she whispered to the stone. "I'll finish what you started." The journal was secure inside her coat, protected from the rain. 5 years of waiting, of building her courage and resources, of learning the law well enough to understand what her father had discovered. 5 years of planning her return. Lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a thunderclap that vibrated through her bones. The storm was directly overhead now. Still, Clara remained, letting the rain wash over her as if it might cleanse her of the grief and anger she had carried since receiving the news of her father's accident. Only when the lightning became too dangerous did she finally turn away from the grave. Her rented room in town suddenly seemed too exposed, too public. Blackwood would soon learn of her return, if he hadn't already. She needed somewhere to gather her thoughts, to review the journal one more time before setting her plan in motion. The path from the cemetery led past a small stone cottage set back from the road. Smoke curled from its chimney despite the warm spring evening. Through the front window, she could see the silhouette of a solitary figure bent over a workbench. Elijah Vance, the stone carver, the man who had known the truth and remained silent. Clara hesitated, then turned toward the cottage. Not out of forgiveness, that was impossible, but necessity. The storm was worsening and she needed shelter to organize her thoughts. More importantly, she needed to look into the eyes of the man who had betrayed her father and see if there was anything there worth salvaging. The rain soaked through her clothes as she approached his door, her resolve hardening with each step. Maxwell Blackwood watched the rain from the bay window of his study, a glass of 20-year-old scotch warming in his hand. The storm pleased him. Farmers would call it a blessing, after weeks of dry weather, not realizing it was precisely such desperation that had built his empire. Water was power in this valley. Always had been. Always would be. Behind him, Harold shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair. At 35, his son should have developed more backbone, more presence. Instead, he remained the same uncertain boy he had always been, a disappointment Maxwell had learned to manage rather than correct. "You're sure it was her?" Maxwell asked, not turning from the window. "Yes, Father. Clara was at the cemetery this afternoon." Maxwell sipped his scotch, considering the implications. "And our mutual friend has confirmed the existence of William's journal. He believes she has it, yes. Believes isn't good enough." Maxwell finally turned, fixing his son with the stare that had broken stronger men. "I need certainty, Harold. Everything we've built is at risk if that journal contains what we think it does." Harold looked down at his hands. "Clara is stubborn. If she's back, it's because she found something. Then we need to find it first." Maxwell moved to his desk and pressed a button on the intercom. "Send Reeves in." The door opened moments later, admitting a man whose unremarkable appearance belied his effectiveness. Of medium height and build, with features so average they seemed designed for forgettability, Reeves had served the Blackwood family for 15 years in capacities that were never discussed openly. Sir Reeves stood at perfect attention, hands clasped behind his back. "Miss Harmon has returned to our little community. I want to know where she's staying, who she's talking to, and most importantly, what she's carrying. Be discreet." "Of course, sir. And Reeves, there's a matter of a retired judge who might need your attention as well." Harold's head snapped up at this, eyes widening. "Father," Maxwell silenced him with a glance. "We'll discuss it later, Harold. Reeves understands the sensitivity of the situation." After Reeves departed, Harold remained in his chair, struggling to find words. "You can't. Clara isn't a threat. She's just the daughter of a man who nearly destroyed everything we built." Maxwell's voice remained calm, reasonable. "Just your former fiancé who left you in this valley rather than stand by your side. Just a woman who's returned with evidence that could undo 15 years of careful planning right when we're on the verge of securing the dam project." He set his glass down with precise control. "Your sentimentality has always been your weakness, Harold. It's why I've had to protect you from yourself. The way you protected me from the truth about William's death." The question hung in the air between them. Maxwell's expression didn't change, but something cold entered his eyes. "We've discussed this. William Harmon's death was a tragic accident. The fact that it occurred after he made baseless accusations against our family was unfortunate timing, nothing more." And if Clara has proof otherwise, Maxwell turned back to the window, watching lightning illuminate the valley that would soon be transformed by his vision. Then we'll deal with it the way we've always dealt with threats to our family's legacy. Together. Thunder punctuated his words, and Harold felt the familiar weight of complicity settle over him once again. The knock on Elijah's door came as the storm reached its full fury. 3 sharp raps barely audible above the thunder. He set aside the book he'd been reading, a worn copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations that had been his companion through many sleepless nights, and moved cautiously to answer. The sight of Clara Harmon on his doorstep struck him like a physical blow. Though 15 years had passed since he'd last presided over a courtroom, his mind automatically cataloged the details as if she were a witness taking the stand mid-30s. Intelligent eyes shadowed by exhaustion, the determined set of her jaw so reminiscent of her father. "Miss Harmon," his voice emerged steadier than he felt. "Judge Vance?" She used his former title deliberately, a reminder that she knew exactly who he was, who he had been. Lightning illuminated her rain-soaked form. Despite the wariness in her expression, there was something undeniably vulnerable about her current state. "You should come inside," he said, stepping back from the doorway. "The storm's getting worse." For a moment, he thought she might refuse. Then another thunderclap decided for her, and she crossed the threshold into his home. Elijah moved to the fireplace, adding another log to the flames. "There are towels in the washroom down the hall," he said, not looking at her. "I'll make tea." And when she returned, her hair was damp, but no longer dripping, her outer clothes replaced by a worn flannel shirt he recognized as one of his own. The sight of her in his clothing created an unexpected intimacy that made him turn away, busying himself with the kettle. "You knew I'd come back eventually," she said, taking a seat at his small kitchen table. "I hoped you wouldn't. For my safety or your conscience." Elijah placed a steaming mug before her. "Both, perhaps." Clara's hands wrapped around the mug, but she didn't drink. "You know why I'm here. Your father's journal." It wasn't a question. "You knew about it." "I suspected." He took the chair opposite her. William was meticulous about documentation. It was only a matter of time before he compiled enough evidence against Blackwood. Evidence you refused to acknowledge when it mattered. The accusation hung between them, justified and unanswerable. Elijah had no defense to offer. "What do you want from me, Miss Harmon?" "The truth, all of it. Starting with why a respected military judge was willing to let an innocent man die rather than stand against Maxwell Blackwood." Elijah's gaze dropped to his own hands, hands that had once wielded the authority of law, but now carved memorials for the dead. The irony was not lost on him. "The truth rarely fits on a headstone," he said finally. "I'm not asking for an epitaph. I'm asking for accountability." "And you believe you are entitled to it?" "I think my father's death earned me that much." Elijah studied her face, searching for something beyond the anger and determination. "You have the journal. What more do you need from me?" "Context corroboration." Clara leaned forward. "The journal contains records of altered water rights, fraudulent foreclosures, and manipulated land surveys. It mentions you by name, Judge Vance. My father believed you held information that could have stopped Blackwood years ago. Information about a military trial involving a false witness." The mention of the trial sent a cold wave through Elijah's body. 15 years of self-imposed exile hadn't been enough to escape that particular ghost. "Whatever you're planning," he said carefully, "Blackwood is more dangerous than you realize. He has resources, connections that reach beyond this valley." "I'm aware of the risks." "Are you... Your father underestimated him, and you let him face those consequences alone?" Clara finished, her voice sharp. "I won't make the same mistake. I'm not looking for someone to stand with me, Judge. I've long since stopped expecting that kind of courage from people in this valley." The words struck with precision, finding the exact center of his shame. "What I need," she continued, "is information. Specifically about Lieutenant Michael Reeves and his court-martial 15 years ago." Elijah felt the blood drain from his face. "How do you know that name?" "It's in the journal. My father believed Reeves was working for Blackwood, that his testimony in some case you presided over was fabricated." She watched his reaction closely. "What I don't understand is how a military trial connects to water rights in Montana." Outside, the storm had begun to subside, the thunder more distant now. In its wake, a heavy silence filled the cottage. "You should go," Elijah said, finally rising from the table. "It's not safe for you to be seen here." "You're afraid of Blackwood." I'm afraid of what happens to people who challenge him. He moved to the window, glancing outside as if expecting to see someone watching. Your father was braver than I am, braver than most, but bravery didn't save him. Clara stood, her expression hardening. Neither did silence. She gathered her still damp coat. My father trusted you once. He believed there was still a man of principle behind the stonecutter's mask. Your father was an optimist. I lost my principles long before I arrived in this valley. She moved to the door, then paused. I'm staying at Widow Chen's boarding house. Room 3, if you remember anything about those principles, or if you want to know what my father wrote about you before he died, you know where to find me. After she left, Elijah remained at the window, watching her figure disappear into the rain-soaked darkness. The mention of Lieutenant Reeves had unlocked memories he'd spent 15 years trying to contain. The trial, the false testimony, the young officer sentenced to 20 years for treason on evidence Elijah had known deep down was fabricated. And now Reeves was here working for Blackwood. The connection Clara sought was closer than she realized and far more dangerous. Elijah moved to the small bedroom, kneeling before the loose floorboard that concealed his past. From beneath it, he retrieved a wooden box containing the only items he'd brought from his previous life: his judge's credentials, a service revolver he'd never fired, and a thin file marked classified. The Reeves court-martial, the case that had ended his career, and though he hadn't realized it at the time, set in motion the events that would eventually lead to William Harmon's death. Elijah opened the file, though he knew its contents by heart. The official record stated that Lieutenant Michael Reeves had been convicted of selling military intelligence to foreign interests. What it didn't show was that Reeves had been framed by someone powerful enough to manufacture evidence convincing enough to fool a military court. Someone like Maxwell Blackwood, whose defense contracts would have been jeopardized by what Reeves had actually discovered. Clara was right about one thing: Elijah had information that could have helped her father. Information that might still help her if it didn't get them both killed first. He replaced the file in the box, but instead of returning to his reading, he moved to his workbench, where a half-finished headstone waited. Taking up his chisel, he began to carve not on the stone's face, but on its hidden backside. The truth rarely fit on a headstone, but sometimes it needed to be etched in stone, nonetheless, even if no one would ever see it. Clara didn't go directly to the boarding house. Despite the late hour and lingering rain, she took a circuitous route through town, pausing occasionally to confirm she wasn't being followed. Old habits from her years in Helena, where she'd learned that caution was the better part of survival. The small town of Riverstone appeared unchanged since her departure 5 years ago. The same storefronts, the same street lamps, casting pools of yellow light on wet pavement, the same mountain silhouette looming in the background like a sentinel. But appearances were deceiving. This place had been transformed by Maxwell Blackwood's influence, its foundations eroded as surely as a riverbank in flood. She passed the Blackwood Bank, its stone facade imposing even in darkness. Next door stood the offices of the Riverstone Gazette, the local paper that had once championed her father's cause before abruptly changing its editorial position. And beside it, the law offices of Peterson and Sons, who had handled the foreclosures on farms throughout the valley. All connected, all part of Blackwood's web. The boarding house run by Mei Chen stood at the edge of town, a Victorian structure whose faded elegance suggested better days. May's husband had been among the first to lose his land to Blackwood's manipulations, the small farm where they had grown specialized herbs and vegetables for restaurants as far away as Seattle. After his death, another convenient accident, May had converted their home into a boarding house to survive. Clara entered through the back door, using the key May had provided earlier. The kitchen was dark but welcoming, smelling of ginger and star anise. A note on the counter informed her that dinner was in the warming oven should she be hungry. The simple kindness brought unexpected tears to Clara's eyes. It had been a long time since anyone had thought of her needs. She took the plate up to her room, eating by the window, where she could observe the street below. Her conversation with Elijah Vance had confirmed what she'd suspected: the former judge was hiding something significant about his connection to Blackwood. His reaction to Reeves' name had been particularly telling. Lieutenant Michael Reeves. Her father's journal contained only brief mentions of the name, but they were enough to suggest that Reeves had been another of Blackwood's victims, in this case framed for a crime he didn't commit in a military court presided over by Elijah Vance. But how did that connect to water rights in Montana? Clara retrieved the journal from its hiding place in her suitcase. The leather-bound book had been her constant companion for the past 5 years, ever since it had arrived anonymously at her apartment in Helena a week after her father's funeral. The timing suggested that William Harmon had arranged for its delivery in the event of his death, a precaution that proved tragically prescient. She turned to the entries from the months before his death when William had been piecing together the extent of Blackwood's manipulations. April 15th. Secured copies of the original water rights agreements from the county archives. Blackwood's claim that his family has historical priority is demonstrably false. The earliest settler agreements show that water access was communal with fixed allocations to prevent any single landowner from controlling the watershed. These documents were somehow removed from the official record, but exist in duplicate in the state capitol. April 20th, Peterson visited today offering to buy the farm at a generous price considering the drought. When I declined, he mentioned how unfortunate it would be if my loan came due during such difficult times. The threat was hardly subtle. I've verified that Blackwood Bank has purchased my mortgage from First Montana, though I received no notification as required by law. April 28th, met with Judge Vance today. Despite his reluctance to discuss his past, I believe he may be key to understanding Blackwood's methods. The military trial he presided over U.S. Fishery Reeves involved falsified evidence provided by a defense contractor later acquired by Blackwood Industries. I suspect Vance realized too late that he had been used to remove someone who threatened Blackwood's interest. May 3rd, drought conditions worsening, yet the North Fork of Miller Creek has completely dried up despite recent rain. Hiked upstream and discovered new diversion pipes on Blackwood land, redirecting water that should flow to at least 6 farms, including mine. Took photographs and water flow measurements as evidence. May 10th, Henderson's farm was foreclosed today. 3rd this month, all purchased by shell companies that trace back to Blackwood. A pattern is emerging. Water diversion creates drought conditions. Crops fail, bank calls loans. Farms are acquired at fraction of value. Then mysteriously, water flow returns to normal once Blackwood owns the land. May 15th found original territorial maps in Historical Society archives showing underground aquifer extends beneath entire valley. According to Geological Survey, a single deep well placed at the convergence point could potentially drain water table for all surrounding properties. Blackwood's proposed dam would sit directly above this point. May 18th, something has changed. I'm being followed. Vance warned me to be careful, said Blackwood has resources beyond what I imagine. Asked if I had secured copies of my evidence somewhere safe. First time he's acknowledged the danger directly. The final entry was dated May 22nd, 3 days before William Harmon's body was found at the bottom of a ravine, his truck apparently having gone off the road during a stormy night. Met with governor's aide today. Presented evidence of water rights violations and environmental impact of proposed dam. He seemed genuinely concerned, promised to arrange meeting with Water Resources Board next week. Perhaps there is still hope for legal remedy. Later, Vance came by after dark, said he was visited by someone from his past Reeves. Warned me that my house might be searched. Moving journal and key documents tonight. If you're reading this, Clara, it means my precautions were warranted. The truth is in the stones where water and blood converge. Trust only those who have lost something to Blackwood. And remember, in this valley, water always finds a way. Clara closed the journal, pondering her father's final message. The truth is in the stones where water and blood converge. What stones? The riverbed. A boundary marker? Or perhaps a headstone? The realization struck her with sudden clarity. Elijah Vance wasn't just a retired judge who carved monuments for the dead. He was the keeper of secrets, recording truths on the hidden sides of grave markers where no one would think to look. Her father had trusted him with something important, something worth killing for. Clara moved to the window, scanning the street below. A solitary figure stood beneath a street lamp across from the boarding house, their features obscured by the brim of a hat. As she watched, the figure lit a cigarette, the brief flare illuminating a face of unremarkable features that nevertheless sent a chill through her body. Someone was watching the boarding house, watching her. Blackwood already knew she had returned, and if Elijah's reaction was any indication, she had far less time than she'd hoped. At the edge of town where the paved road gave way to gravel, Isaiah Porter sat in his battered truck and contemplated another drink. The half-empty bottle of whiskey on the passenger seat promised temporary relief from the memories that haunted him, But even alcohol couldn't completely blur the images of what he'd done, what he'd helped Blackwood do to the valley he'd once loved. 15 years as the bank's chief loan officer approving mortgages designed to fail foreclosing on families who had farmed the same land for generations. Signing paperwork he knew contained falsified information. Standing silent as his neighbors lost everything. All for what a comfortable salary and the promise that he would be spared Blackwood's predations. Until he wasn't. Porter touched the eviction notice folded in his pocket. After all he'd done, all the compromises and silent complicity, Blackwood had still found a way to take us home. The official reason was necessary acquisition for infrastructure development, a bureaucratic phrase that masked the truth. His land, like so many others, sat above the aquifer that Blackwood's dam project would control. The headlights of an approaching car drew Porter from his bitter reflections. He quickly stashed the whiskey bottle under the seat, not wanting to add a drunk driving charge to his troubles. But instead of passing the vehicle, an expensive black SUV that screamed Blackwood pulled alongside his truck. The passenger window lowered, revealing Harold Blackwood's strained features. "Isaiah, I've been looking for you." Porter's laugh was hollow. "Come to deliver the eviction notice personally. Your father normally sends his goons for that kind of thing. I didn't know about your house until today." Harold's voice held what sounded like genuine regret. "That's not why I'm here, but then what does the Prince of the Valley want with a disgraced bank officer?" Harold glanced in his rearview mirror before responding. "Clara Harmon is back." The name hit Porter like a physical blow. William Harmon had been one of the few who had treated him with dignity, even after learning of his role in Blackwood's schemes. The man's death still featured prominently in Porter's nightmares. "What does that have to do with me?" "She has her father's journal, and she's been asking about the original water rights documents." Porter's mouth went dry. "I don't know anything about that." "Don't lie to me, Isaiah. You were the one who notarized the altered documents. If anyone knows where the originals are, it's you." The accusation wasn't wrong. Porter had indeed been the notary for many of Blackwood's fraudulent property transfers. But Harold was wrong about one thing: Porter didn't know where the original documents were. William Harmon had removed them from the county archives before Porter could alter them, hiding them somewhere even Blackwood's thorough search hadn't discovered. "If you're worried about Clara Harmon finding evidence that incriminates your family, you should talk to your father," Porter said. "I'm just another victim now." Harold's expression hardened. "No one in this valley is just a victim, Isaiah. We've all made choices." He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. "This is enough to relocate, start fresh somewhere Blackwood Holdings doesn't operate. In exchange for everything you know about William Harmon's investigation and any documents you might have, secured." Porter stared at the envelope. Freedom from Blackwood, from this valley of ghosts and regrets, tempted him more than Harold could know. But redemption couldn't be purchased so easily. "Your father visited me the day after William's accident." Porter said, not reaching for the money. "Asked if I knew what William might have done with certain documents. When I said no, he reminded me that accidents happen to careless people in this valley. Said it would be a shame if my drinking led to a similar tragedy." Harold's face paled. "He threatened you." "Not in so many words. Your father rarely needs to be explicit. His reputation speaks for itself." Porter started his truck. "You want my advice, Harold? Stop trying to clean up your father's messes. There are some stains that don't wash out." As Porter drove away, he glanced in his rearview mirror to see Harold still watching him, the envelope clutched uselessly in his hand. The man was caught between loyalty to his father and his own conscience, a position Porter understood all too well. What Harold didn't understand, what perhaps no one except William Harmon had fully grasped, was that Blackwood's scheme extended far beyond simply acquiring land. The dam project wasn't just about controlling water. It was about rewriting the valley's future, determining who would prosper and who would be washed away. And Porter, despite his cowardice and complicity, had finally reached his limit. The eviction notice had seen to that. With nothing left to lose, perhaps it was time to atone for 15 years of silence. Clara Harmon would need allies with insider knowledge of Blackwood's operations. And Isaiah Porter, former bank officer and current town drunk, knew more about the financial side of those operations than anyone still alive. It was time to sober up and face the consequences of his choices, whatever they might be. The cemetery was silent under the morning mist, headstones standing like sentinels among the dew-heavy grass. Elijah moved between them with practiced familiarity, heading toward the section where William Harmon rested. Sleep had eluded him after Clara's visit, his mind too full of old ghosts and new threats. The mention of Reeves had confirmed his worst fears. Blackwood had brought his former pawn to Riverstone, likely to deal with any loose ends before the dam project received final approval. Loose ends like William Harmon's daughter and a retired military judge who knew too much. Elijah knelt beside William's grave, noting the fresh flowers Clara had placed there the previous day. 5 years had done little to dull the shame he felt whenever he visited this spot. "She's as stubborn as you were," he said softly to the stone, "and just as likely to underestimate what Blackwood will do to protect himself." The sound of footsteps on wet grass alerted him to another's presence. Elijah turned to find Clara watching him, her expression guarded, talking to the dead Judge Vance. "Sometimes they're the only ones who'll listen." She approached, standing opposite him across her father's grave. Did he reply? Not in words. Elijah stood brushing earth from his knees. "But I've found that silence can be quite eloquent in a graveyard." "Is that why you carve messages on the backs of headstones, to give voice to those who can no longer speak for themselves?" The question startled him. Few people knew about his hidden inscriptions, the true epitaphs that recorded lives with all their complexity, not just the sanitized versions approved for public consumption. "How did you know about that?" "My father's last journal entry mentioned the truth in the stones." "It wasn't hard to connect the dots, especially after seeing your reaction when I mentioned the Maves." Elijah studied her face, noting the determination in her eyes, the same expression William had worn when presenting evidence of Blackwood's water diversions. "What else did your father's journal say?" "That you were visited by someone from your past. That you warned him his house might be searched." Clara's voice hardened. "What it doesn't explain is why you didn't do more to protect him after that." The accusation wasn't new, but it still cut deep. Elijah had asked himself the same question countless times over the past 5 years. "I offered to hide him. He refused." "That sounds like my father, but it doesn't excuse your inaction." "No," Elijah agreed. "It doesn't." They stood in silence, the morning mist curling around the gravestones like searching fingers. "Show me," Clara finally said. "Show you what you carved on the back of his headstone. The truth you couldn't say to his face while he was alive." Elijah hesitated, then moved behind William's marker. Clara followed, watching as he brushed away lichen and dirt from the stone's hidden side. There, carved in smaller but precise lettering, was a different epitaph: William Harmon, who saw the truth and spoke it without fear. Betrayed by his community, but never by his principles. His courage indicts our cowardice. Water rights, May 25th. "Water rights," Clara read aloud, "and the date of his death." "It was as much as I dared record at the time," Elijah explained. "Blackwood has the sheriff's office in his pocket. I knew the grave would be monitored for a while after the funeral. But not the back of the stone." Clara's fingers traced the letters her father would never see. "Clever." "Hardly. Just the desperate act of a man with too many regrets and too little courage." Clara turned to face him. "You still haven't told me why Reeves is important, or why his case connects to what's happening here." Elijah glanced around the cemetery, confirming they were alone. "Not here. There are better places for that conversation. I'm tired of evasions, Judge. I need answers, not more mysteries. And I need to be certain we're not being watched." He nodded toward the far end of the cemetery, where a groundskeeper was trimming hedges near the entry gate. "Blackwood has eyes everywhere." Clara followed his gaze, understanding dawning in her expression. "Fine. Where then, Peon?" "There's a place your father and I used to meet, a fishing cabin on Miller Creek upstream from where the diversions start. It's secluded in the watermass conversation." He checked his watch. "I'll go first. Wait 30 minutes, then take the north trail from behind Chen's boarding house. Stay off the main roads." She nodded, her earlier hostility tempered by the reality of their situation. "Why are you helping me now when you wouldn't help my father?" The question deserved an honest answer. Elijah looked back at William's grave, at the flowers bent under the weight of morning dew. "Because I'm tired of carving epitaphs for people who died before their time." He met her gaze directly. "And because sometimes the only way to atone for past cowardice is to find courage when it's needed again." Clara held his gaze for a long moment, searching for something, sincerity perhaps, or resolve. Whether she found it, Elijah couldn't tell. 30 minutes, she said finally. But if this is some kind of trap, Judge Vance, remember that I have copies of my father's journal in places you'll never find them. It's not a trap, Elijah assured her. Just an old man trying to correct a mistake that's cost too many lives already. As he walked away, Elijah felt the weight of William's headstone behind him, the public face displaying one truth, the hidden side another. Like the man himself, he had lived a divided existence since coming to this valley, outwardly the reclusive stonecutter. Inwardly, the judge still weighing evidence, still reaching conclusions, still failing to act on them. Clara Harmon's return had forced a reckoning he'd avoided for 5 years. It was time to choose which side of the stone would represent his true epitaph. Bad. Maxwell Blackwood spread the satellite images across his desk, the overhead view of the valley resembling the battle maps he'd once studied during his military service. In many ways, this was a war for resources, for control, for the future of the region he'd spent decades reshaping to his vision. The survey team confirmed it, he told the assembled group. The aquifer access point is exactly where we predicted. Once the dam is in place, we'll control not just the surface water, but the groundwater for the entire eastern half of the county. The men around the table, board members of Blackwood Holdings and representatives from the construction company, nodded appreciatively. None of them were local. Maxwell had learned long ago that outsiders were more reliable for sensitive operations. They saw the valley as an investment opportunity, not a homeland. The environmental impact report, one of them asked, being finalized now. Peterson has ensured the regulatory hurdles are minimal. Maxwell indicated a stack of documents on the corner of his desk. The governor's office has already signaled their support contingent on the final approval from the Water Resources Board next week. And local opposition, Maxwell's smile was thin, has been systematically addressed over the past 15 years. We now own or control 80% of the land with historical water rights. The remaining holdouts are too few and too fragmented to mount effective resistance. He didn't mention Clara Harmon's return or William's missing journal. Those were complications he would handle personally, not matters for a board meeting. The door opened and Reeves entered with the silent efficiency that made him so valuable. He handed Maxwell a folded note, then retreated to stand by the wall, his presence barely registering to the others in the room. Maxwell read the message, his expression unchanging, despite the surge of anger it provoked. Clara Harmon had been seen visiting the cemetery that morning, where she'd met with Elijah Vance. The two had spoken privately by William's grave before separating. An alliance he had hoped to prevent was already forming. "Gentlemen," Maxwell said, refolding the note, "I believe we've covered the essential points. The materials distributed outline the next phase of the project, including the timeline for the final property acquisitions. I appreciate your continued confidence in Blackwood Holdings' vision for this valley's future." After the others filed out, Maxwell remained seated, Reeves standing attentively nearby. "She went to Vance," Maxwell said, not bothering to hide his displeasure. "Yes, sir." They appeared to have a substantive conversation. And now, Miss Harmon returned to the boarding house. Judge Vance went back to his workshop, but left again 30 minutes later with fishing equipment. He took the trail toward Miller Creek. Maxwell steepled his fingers, considering the implications. "He's taking her to the old cabin, William's meeting place." "It would appear so, sir. How unfortunate that our retired judge hasn't learned from his friend's example." Maxwell turned his chair to face the large map of the valley that dominated the wall behind his desk. "The dam approval comes before the water board in 1 week. We can't afford complications now." "Would you like me to intervene, sir?" Maxwell considered the question. Reeves was efficient, but sometimes lacked subtlety. And Clara Harmon, unlike her father, had connections beyond the valley colleagues in Helena who would notice her disappearance. "Not yet. I want to know what they're planning first. Follow them, but maintain distance. We need to understand exactly what William left behind and who else might be involved." He turned back to Reeves. "And check on Porter. Harold seems to think our former bank officer might be troublesome." "Already done, sir. Mr. Porter cleared out his cabin early this morning, took clothes and personal effects, but left most furniture. His truck was seen heading east toward the county line." "Running away." Maxwell's tone was dismissive. "As expected. Still have someone confirm his departure. Porter knows enough to be dangerous if he finds his conscience." "Of course, sir." After Reeves departed, Maxwell moved to the window, gazing out at the valley that had been his obsession for more than 2 decades. From this vantage point, he could see the winding path of Miller Creek as it descended from the mountains, the patchwork of farms and ranches that had once been independent entities, but now mostly belonged to Blackwood Holdings through various shell companies. Soon the dam would rise, where the valley narrowed, creating a reservoir that would drown the upper reaches of several creeks. The official purpose was flood control and hydroelectric power generation, worthy public benefits that had helped secure government backing. But Maxwell's true interest lay beneath the surface in the aquifer that stretched beneath the valley floor, connecting all the region's water systems. Control the aquifer access point, control the valley. It was a simple equation, one he had been solving methodically since discovering the geological surveys that revealed the aquifer's existence. William Harmon had threatened that plan by uncovering both the aquifer's importance and the fraudulent means Maxwell had used to acquire the necessary land. Judge Vance could have been similarly problematic, given his knowledge of the Reeves case and its connection to Blackwood Industries. But Vance had proven malleable, his guilt over the Reeves court-martial, making him vulnerable to pressure. Maxwell had assumed the judge's cowardice would persist indefinitely. Clara's return had changed that calculation. Something about William Harmon's daughter had awakened the judge's dormant conscience, a development Maxwell found both irritating and predictable. Guilt, like iron, could be hammered into different shapes, but its essential nature remained unchanged. Maxwell returned to his desk and pressed the intercom. "Send Harold in." His son entered moments later, his expression wary. Their conversation about Clara the previous evening had clearly left him unsettled. "I need you to reach out to your former fiancée," Maxwell said without preamble. Harold's surprise was evident. "Clara, why would she talk to me after all this time?" "Because you share history, because despite everything she likely still believes you were manipulated rather than complicit." Maxwell's tone was matter of fact. "And because you're going to offer her something she desperately wants validation." "I don't understand." "Tell her you've discovered documents that support her father's claims. Express regret for not believing him sooner. Suggest that together you might be able to expose the truth without anyone else getting hurt." Harold's face paled. "You want me to trick her into revealing what she knows?" "I want you to protect this family's interests as you've always done." Maxwell's voice hardened. "Clara Harmon and Elijah Vance are meeting at the Miller Creek cabin right now, comparing notes, formulating plans that could undo 15 years of careful work. Your history with Clara gives us an opportunity to manage that threat. And if I refuse?" The question hung in the air between them. Maxwell studied his son, noting the unusual defiance in his posture. Harold had always been the weakest link in the Blackwood legacy, too soft, too concerned with abstract notions of right and wrong. "Then I'll be forced to use less elegant methods to resolve the situation," Maxwell said finally. "Methods that would be considerably more unpleasant for all concerned, including your former fiancée." Harold's gaze dropped, the brief flare of courage extinguished. "I'll talk to her." "Good. Reeves will provide you with suitable documents to make your story convincing. Nothing authentic, of course, but enough to establish your apparent change of heart." After Harold left, Maxwell turned again to the valley map, tracing the path of Miller Creek to where the cabin stood isolated and vulnerable. Judge Vance had chosen poorly for his revelation. The cabin was too remote, too exposed, too easy to monitor. Whatever secrets they were sharing there, Maxwell would soon know them as well. And then, as always, he would adapt his strategy accordingly. The dam would be built. The water would be controlled. The Blackwood legacy would endure regardless of the cost. The fishing cabin was exactly as Clara remembered from childhood excursions with her father. A simple one-room structure of weathered logs perched on the bank of Miller Creek, its porch extending out over the water on stilts. Time and neglect had added a pronounced sag to the roof and patches of moss to the north-facing walls, but the essential character remained unchanged. Inside, Elijah had already lit the wood stove, dispelling the chill and dampness that pervaded the mountains even in late spring. He stood at the small table arranging papers from a leather portfolio he must have brought with him. "No one followed you?" he asked as Clara entered. "I took precautions." She shrugged off her backpack, removing the journal and a folder of her own. "Though I doubt it matters. Blackwood probably knows we're meeting by now." "Almost certainly," Elijah agreed. "But knowing and hearing are different matters. The creek provides some protection from listening devices, and I've checked the cabin regularly over the years." It's as secure as anywhere in this valley can be. Clara took in the sparse furnishings, a narrow cot against one wall, a wooden table, and two chairs, a rudimentary kitchen area with a camp stove, and a few basic supplies. It didn't look like a place that saw frequent use. You maintained this place all these years. Your father asked me to, said there might come a time when someone would need a safe place to organize information. Elijah's expression was solemn. I think he suspected he might not live to complete his investigation. The thought that her father had anticipated his own death sent a cold wave through Clara's body. She'd spent 5 years believing his accident was an impulsive act of silencing by Blackwood. The idea that William had known the danger and proceeded anyway had made preparations for what might follow, painted his final days in a new and painful light. You should have told me sooner, she said, the anger in her voice directed as much at her father as at Elijah. Would it have changed anything? Would you have stayed away if you'd known how dangerous Blackwood truly is? Clara didn't answer. They both knew she wouldn't have. Show me what you've brought, she said instead, indicating the papers on the table. Elijah spread out several documents, military records, court transcripts, newspaper clippings, and what appeared to be internal memos on Blackwood Industries letterhead. 15 years ago, he began, I presided over the court-martial of Lieutenant Michael Reeves, a logistics officer assigned to review defense contracts in Afghanistan. Reeves was accused of selling classified information to foreign interests, a charge that carried a potential death sentence, though we settled on 20 years in military prison. He indicated a transcript. The evidence against him seemed overwhelming. Bank transfers to offshore accounts, emails, discussing classified information, testimony from fellow officers who claimed he had been asking suspicious questions about security protocols. But it was fabricated, Clara said, recalling her father's notes. Yes, though I didn't realize it until after the verdict. Elijah's voice carried the weight of old regret. A month after sentencing, I received an anonymous package containing evidence that the key witness against Reeves had been paid by a defense contractor called Stratcorp to provide false testimony. The same contractor had created the offshore accounts and fabricated the emails. Stratcorp, Clara repeated. My father mentioned that name in connection with Blackwood, because Maxwell Blackwood acquired Stratcorp 6 months after the trial. It was his first major defense industry purchase, and it gave him access to several lucrative military contracts in Afghanistan. Elijah shuffled through the papers, producing a newspaper clipping announcing the acquisition. But why frame Reeves? What had he discovered? Not what, who. Elijah handed her a faded photograph showing a younger Maxwell Blackwood in military uniform, standing beside a man in civilian clothes. Blackwood served in the First Gulf War. After his discharge, he used his military connections to build his initial fortune through defense, contracting some of it legitimate, much of it not. Clara studied the photo. The other man, Ahmad Kabir, a warlord who controlled opium production in parts of Afghanistan. Reeves discovered evidence that Stratcorp was paying Kabir to ensure their supply convoys could pass through his territory safely. They were funding a drug lord. Worse, they were using U.S. military equipment to do it. Trucks, weapons, communications gear, all diverted from their intended destinations and sold on the black market, with the profits split between Stratcorp executives and Kabir's organization. Clara tried to process the implications. And Blackwood knew about this when he bought Stratcorp. He didn't just know about it, he orchestrated it. Elijah's expression was grim. The evidence I received suggested that Blackwood had been the architect of the scheme from the beginning, using Stratcorp as a front for his operations. When Reeves started asking questions, Blackwood arranged to have him framed and removed. So what happened to Reeves? Obviously, he's not in military prison if he's working for Blackwood now. That's the most disturbing part. Elijah shuffled the papers, producing a military record. 3 years into his sentence, Reeves supposedly died in a prison altercation. His body was released to a cousin, his only living relative, according to military records. But it was faked, almost certainly. I believe Blackwood arranged for Reeves' death and release, then gave him a choice: work for Blackwood or face the consequences of a military deserter and escaped prisoner. Clara sat back, struggling to connect these revelations to her father's investigation. But what does any of this have to do with water rights in Montana? Why would a defense contractor with military corruption in his past care about a rural valley's water supply? Because water is the new oil, Elijah said simply, especially in the western states. Blackwood was looking to diversify his holdings after the drawdown in Afghanistan. Water infrastructure dams, reservoirs, treatment facilities offered a new frontier for government contracts without the scrutiny that came with military operations. He moved to a map pinned to the cabin wall, one that showed the watershed of the entire county. Your father discovered that Blackwood wasn't just buying land for agricultural purposes. He was systematically acquiring control of every major water source in the valley, particularly those connected to the underground aquifer. Clara joined him at the map, noting the properties marked in red, all now owned by Blackwood or his shell companies. The dam is the final piece, she said, understanding dawning. Once it's built, he'll control not just the surface water, but the groundwater for the entire region. Exactly. And with the governor's backing and federal infrastructure funds, he'll be paid to build the instrument of his control. Elijah's finger traced the proposed dam location. The environmental impact report has been falsified, just like the water rights documents. The dam will alter the aquifer's flow patterns, potentially draining wells on properties Blackwood doesn't yet control, making them worthless and ripe for acquisition. The scale of the scheme was breathtaking. Clara had thought they were dealing with a local tyrant using strong-arm tactics to expand his holdings. But this was something far more sinister, a systematic plan to monopolize a resource essential to life itself. We need to stop the dam approval, she said. It won't be easy. The Water Resources Board meets next week to give final authorization. Blackwood has spent years cultivating relationships with key officials. But if we have evidence of fraud, of environmental impact report falsification, evidence isn't enough. Elijah interrupted gently. Your father had evidence. Look where it got him. The harsh reality of his words silenced her momentarily. William Harmon had believed in the system and the power of truth to prevail against corruption. His faith had cost him his life. Then what do you suggest? She asked finally. Give up. Let Blackwood turn the valley into his private fiefdom. No. Elijah's voice was firm. But we need to be strategic. Blackwood has resources, connections, and a willingness to eliminate threats permanently. We need allies, people with insider knowledge of his operations who can corroborate what we already know. Like Isaiah Porter. Elijah looked surprised. The bank officer. How do you know about him? My father's journal mentioned him as someone who processed the fraudulent foreclosures but might be having second thoughts. After Clara opened the journal, finding the relevant entry, he wrote that Porter had started drinking heavily after the Henderson foreclosure, that he'd accidentally revealed discrepancies in the loan documents during a confrontation at the bank. Porter would know which properties were targeted specifically for their water access, Elijah mused, and he might have copies of the original loan documents before they were altered. If he's willing to help, that's a significant if. Porter has been Blackwood's instrument for years. What would make him turn now? Before Clara could respond, a noise outside the cabin drew their attention. Not the natural sounds of the forest or creek, but the deliberate crunch of footsteps on gravel. Someone was approaching. Elijah moved quickly to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. His body tensed, then relaxed slightly. Porter, he said with disbelief. Speak of the devil. Clara joined him at the window. The man approaching the cabin appeared to be in his 50s, his once solid frame now gaunt, his clothing rumpled as if he'd slept in it. He carried a leather satchel clutched tightly to his chest and moved with the careful deliberation of someone either very drunk or trying very hard not to appear so. How did he know we were here? Clara whispered. I don't know. Elijah's expression was wary, and that concerns me greatly. Porter reached the cabin door and knocked 3 hesitant raps that suggested uncertainty rather than confidence. Elijah nodded to Clara, who moved to the side of the door out of the immediate line of sight while he opened it. Isaiah, Elijah said, blocking the entrance. This is unexpected. Porter's eyes were bloodshot, but clear. I know why you're here, Judge. Same reason William Harmon came to this cabin 5 years ago. His gaze shifted to where Clara stood. And you must be his daughter. I've been looking for you. How did you find us? Elijah asked, making no move to invite him inside. Harold Blackwood told me you'd be here. Porter's laugh held no humor. He's trying to play both sides, warning me that his father has plans for anyone who might support Clara Harmon's investigation, while simultaneously reporting your movements to Reeves. The mention of Harold's duplicity sent a wave of complicated emotions through Clara's expression. Despite everything she had hoped her former fiancé might have changed in the years since their engagement ended. "Why are you here, Isaiah?" Elijah pressed. Porter held up the satchel. "Because I'm tired of drowning my conscience in whiskey. Because Blackwood is about to evict me from the home my grandfather built. And because these documents might help you stop him before he controls every drop of water in this valley." Elijah stepped aside, allowing Porter to enter. As he passed Clara, the bank officer nodded in acknowledgement. "I knew your father," he said quietly. "He was a good man, better than most of us deserved." The simple statement, delivered with evident remorse, did more to establish Porter's sincerity than any protestations of reformed character could have. As Porter emptied the contents of his satchel onto the table, Clara caught Elijah's eye. The arrival of Isaiah Porter with documents and insider knowledge was an unexpected development, potentially valuable but also concerning. If Harold Blackwood knew they were meeting at the cabin, his father almost certainly knew as well. Their time was running out faster than they had anticipated. Outside, the creek continued its eternal journey, downhill water, finding its inevitable path despite obstacles. Clara hoped their pursuit of justice would prove equally unstoppable, even against the formidable dam that Maxwell Blackwood had spent 15 years constructing in its way. The documents Porter brought transformed the cabin's small table into a landscape of betrayal. Loan agreements with altered terms, property assessments deliberately undervalued after water diversion had rendered fields barren, foreclosure notices dated before the payment deadlines they supposedly missed. He was systematic. Porter explained, his hands steadier than his voice as he arranged the papers in chronological order. Started with the farthest properties upstream, where the diversions wouldn't be noticed immediately. Then worked his way down the valley property by property. Clara studied a map showing the progression of Blackwood's acquisitions over 15 years. "It's like watching a cancer spread." "Cancer is unplanned," Elijah countered. "This was designed from the beginning." The pattern suggests Blackwood had identified the aquifer convergence point before he acquired a single property. Porter nodded. He had geological surveys done under the guise of mineral exploration back in '08. Paid cash, kept the results private. He extracted a faded document from the bottom of his stack. "I kept a copy. Wasn't sure why at the time, just seemed important." The survey showed detailed underground water flows with a red circle marking what it labeled optimal extraction point. "The proposed dam site," Clara observed. "Directly above it," Porter confirmed. "Once the reservoir fills, the weight of that much water will create pressure on the aquifer system. According to the geologist, it will essentially redirect the underground flows toward Blackwood's wells, while reducing output to neighboring properties." Clara felt a chill as the full scope of Blackwood's plan became clear. "He's weaponizing physics, and doing it with taxpayer funding," Elijah added bitterly. "The infrastructure bill allocates $30 million for the dam project." Porter's bloodshot eyes held a haunted look. "I helped him destroy people's lives, families that had farmed here for generations." He reached for the flask in his pocket, then stopped himself. "Your father tried to warn me, Miss Harmon. Said Blackwood wasn't just taking land, he was taking future." "The original water rights," Clara pressed. "My father mentioned them in his journal. Documents showing that water access was communal, not individual." Porter's expression shifted. "The territorial agreements. William found them in the county archives, or rather discovered they had been removed from the official record." "But duplicates existed in the state capitol," Elijah interjected. "William was planning to retrieve them the week he died." "He never got the chance." Porter's voice dropped. "But he told me he'd found something even more significant. An earlier document predating the territorial agreements. Something about the original settlers and the native tribes." Clara leaned forward. "Did he say where this document was?" Porter shook his head. "Only that it was safe, that he'd ensured Blackwood would never find it." He hesitated. "There was something else, something about stones and water. It didn't make sense to me at the time." "The truth is in the stones where water and blood converge," Clara quoted from memory, his last journal entry. Elijah's brow furrowed. "Not gravestones, then. That was my first thought." "Boundary stones," Porter suggested. "The original property markers in the valley were limestone blocks, most of which Blackwood has removed or replaced," Elijah noted. Clara closed her eyes, trying to think as her father would have. William Harmon had been meticulous, always creating systems and backups. If he'd hidden something of vital importance, he would have encoded its location in a way that would make sense to someone who knew him well. Stones, water, and blood, she repeated. What converges in this valley besides creek? Elijah's expression suddenly shifted. The meeting point, where Miller Creek joins the Blackwater River. He moved to the map on the wall. Here on the old Henderson property, the original boundary between settler lands and native territory was marked by 3 standing stones. Bloodstone Crossing. Porter said, recognition dawning. It got the name during the conflicts in the 1870s. The stones were supposedly stained with blood from a battle. My father used to take me fishing there, Clara remembered. He'd tell me stories about the stones, how they were witnesses to history. She looked up, meeting Elijah's gaze. That's where he would have hidden something important, something he wanted me to find. Blackwood acquired the Henderson property 4 years ago, Porter warned. It's fenced and patrolled now, part of his private conservation area, which means we'll need to access it carefully, Elijah said, already thinking through approaches. Preferably at night when a sharp crack from outside silenced him mid-sentence. Not thunder, but the unmistakable sound of a branch breaking under weight. Someone was in the woods near the cabin. Elijah moved quickly to extinguish the lamp, plunging the cabin into afternoon dimness. He gestured for Porter and Clara to gather the documents while he peered through the window. 2 men, he whispered, moving through the trees toward the clearing. Reeves is one of them. Clara's heart pounded as she helped Porter return papers to his satchel. How did they find us so quickly? Harold, Porter suggested grimly. He must have told his father about our meeting. Or we were followed, Elijah countered. There's no time to debate it now. We need to move. He nodded toward the back of the cabin. There's a path that follows the creek downstream. It's overgrown but passable. I'll create a distraction while you 2 get clear. We're not separating, Clara insisted. It's not a debate, Miss Harmon. Elijah's voice carried the authority of his former position. Your father entrusted that journal to you for a reason. You need to reach Bloodstone Crossing and find him whatever he hid there. Another sound from outside, closer now. Voices trying to be quiet but carrying in the mountain air. Judge, Porter began, but Elijah cut him off. I have unfinished business with Reeves. This is my opportunity to address it. He checked his revolver, confirming it was loaded. Take the back exit. Stay in the creek where you can to mask your scent and footprints. Head east, then circle north when you reach the Lopez property line. Clara wanted to argue further, but the determination in Elijah's face made it clear his decision was final. We'll meet at Josephine Gray's house, she said. After dark. Elijah nodded, then surprised her by placing a weathered hand on her shoulder. Your father would be proud of what you're doing. I wasn't brave enough to stand with him, but perhaps I can make amends by standing with his daughter. The simple sincerity of the gesture caught Clara off guard. For a moment, she saw beyond the stern exterior to the man her father had considered a friend, a man who had carried the weight of his failures for 5 long years. Be careful, Judge. Justice usually requires risk, Miss Harmon, something I forgot for too long. As Clara and Porter slipped out the back door and into the creek bed, Elijah took up position by the front window, revolver ready but not yet drawn. Confronting Reeves might be foolish, even suicidal, but it was also necessary. The man who had been framed, imprisoned, and press-ganged into Blackwood's service needed to know that at least one person remembered the truth. Whether that knowledge would make Reeves an ally or further cement him as an enemy remained to be seen. Harold Blackwood sat in his parked car on the outskirts of town, knuckles white against the steering wheel as he weighed his options. His father expected him to contact Clara to exploit their history for information. The reasonable, safe choice was to comply as he always had. But something had changed. Perhaps it was seeing Clara again after 5 years, even if only from a distance. Perhaps it was the growing realization that his father's ambitions had destroyed lives, including William Harmon's. Or perhaps it was simply that at 35, Harold was finally tired of being a pawn in someone else's game. His phone vibrated with an incoming call, his father undoubtedly checking on his progress. Harold silenced it, then made a decision that felt simultaneously terrifying and inevitable. He started the car and headed not toward the boarding house where Clara was staying, but toward the one person in the valley who had stood against his father longer than anyone, Josephine Gray. The widow's house sat on a ridge overlooking the town, a Victorian structure whose faded elegance mirrored its owner's dignified endurance. Harold had avoided this place for years, aware that Josephine held him partially responsible for her husband's death. Judge Gray's suicide had come after he'd signed off on several of Blackwood's fraudulent property transfers transactions that Harold had personally assured him were legitimate. Now, as he parked beneath the sprawling oak that dominated Josephine's front yard, Harold felt the full weight of those past deceptions. He had been 25, then eager to prove himself worthy of the Blackwood name. His father had taught him that business sometimes required managing officials, and Harold had been an apt pupil. It had never occurred to him that a man might break under the weight of his compromised principles. Not until he'd attended Judge Gray's funeral and seen Josephine's eyes clear, and knowing, despite her grief, fixed accusingly on him throughout the service. Harold approached the front door, rehearsing what he would say. Before he could knock, the door opened to reveal Josephine, herself straight-backed and regal despite her 70 years. "Harold Blackwood," she said, neither surprised nor welcome in her tone. "I wondered when conscience might finally drive you to my door." The directness of her greeting left him momentarily speechless. "I'm not here to make excuses," he managed finally. "Good, I've no patience for them." She stepped back, opening the door wider. "You might as well come in. The whole town will know you visited by supper time regardless." The interior of the house was like Josephine herself, elegant, unapologetically old-fashioned, and marked by subtle signs of grief never fully processed. Judge Gray's study remained exactly as he'd left it, Harold noted, as they passed its open-door books, in their places papers, still on the desk, as if he might return at any moment. Josephine led him to a parlor where afternoon light filtered through lace curtains, giving the room a dreamlike quality. She did not offer tea or pleasantries, merely settled into a high-backed chair and fixed him with an evaluative gaze. "Clara Harmon has returned," she said. "Yes, and your father has sent you to manage the situation." Harold winced at her choice of words, so close to his father's instructions. "He asked me to contact her, yes, to use our history to gain her trust. And will you?" The simple question cut through his prevarications. Harold looked down at his hands, manicured and uncalloused, the hands of someone who had never created anything of his own. "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me wants to warn her about my father's plans. Another part is afraid of the consequences. For her or for yourself?" "Both," he said honestly. Josephine's expression softened slightly. "At least you're capable of honesty when pressed. That's something your father never managed." "My father believes he's securing our family's future. The Valley's future." "Your father believes in power, Harold. Nothing more, nothing less." Josephine's voice carried the weight of long observation. "He uses the language of progress and development to disguise his true aim: control." Harold couldn't refute the assessment. "Clara's in danger," he said instead. "My father sent Reeves to locate her and Judge Vance. They were meeting at the old fishing cabin on Miller Creek." Josephine's posture stiffened. "Reeves, the man who appeared in town shortly after William's death. He works for my father, has for years." "Doing what exactly?" Harold hesitated, then decided that half-truths would no longer suffice. "Removing obstacles, applying pressure when needed, ensuring that problems don't persist. A enforcer, then, like the men who visited my husband the night before he took his life." The accusation was plain, and Harold did not attempt to deny it. "I didn't know about that. Not until after." "Ignorance chosen is still a choice, Mr. Blackwood." Josephine's eyes were unflinching. "You've spent your life averting your gaze from your father's methods while accepting the fruits of his labor." The assessment stung precisely because it was accurate. Harold had maintained plausible deniability while benefiting from his father's ruthless expansion. Even his relationship with Clara had begun as a strategic alliance, the merging of a historic Valley family with the rising Blackwood dynasty. That it had evolved into genuine affection had been unexpected and ultimately irrelevant to his father's plans. "I want to make amends," Harold said finally. "To whom, Clara? The memory of her father, or perhaps to yourself?" Josephine leaned forward slightly. "Guilt is a poor foundation for redemption, Mr. Blackwood. It tends to crumble when the consequences become real." "Then what would you suggest?" A hint of his father's impatience crept into Harold's voice. "I came here because you've opposed my father longer than anyone still living in this valley. If not guilt, then what should motivate me?" "Justice," Josephine replied simply. Not for yourself, but for those who have suffered. William Harmon, my husband, the families who lost their heritage to your father's machinations. She paused. And yes, for Clara, who deserves to know exactly what happened to her father and why. Even if that truth implicates me, especially then. Harold absorbed this finding unexpected relief in the prospect of finally acknowledging his role in the valley's transformation. My father will destroy me, he said, not seeking sympathy but stating a fact. Perhaps, Josephine conceded. Or perhaps you'll discover that Maxwell Blackwood is merely a man, not the omnipotent force you've allowed him to become in your mind. Before Harold could respond, a chime from the entryway announced another visitor. Josephine rose her expression, suggesting she'd been expecting this arrival. It seems our conversation will need to continue with additional participants, she said, moving toward the hallway. Assuming you're committed to the path you've chosen. I am, Harold replied, surprising himself with his conviction. When Josephine returned, she was accompanied by Clara Harmon and Isaiah Porter, both appearing damp and disheveled, as if they'd traveled cross-country rather than by road. Clara stopped short upon seeing Harold, her expression shifting rapidly from surprise to wariness to anger. What is he doing here? She demanded of Josephine. The same thing you are, my dear, seeking allies against a common enemy. Clara's disbelieving laugh held no humor. Harold isn't an ally. He's his father's instrument, always has been. That's fair, Harold admitted, rising to face her directly for the first time in 5 years. I've earned your distrust, but today I'm here to return something that belongs to you. He removed an envelope from his jacket and held it out. Clara made no move to take it. What is this? Another engagement ring? Another promise you won't keep? The bitterness in her voice was justified, but Harold pressed on. It's a copy of the original water rights agreement for the valley, the territorial document that establishes communal access to the watershed. He set it on the table between them when she still didn't reach for it. My father doesn't know I have it. This revelation visibly caught Clara off guard. How did you get this? From the same place your father found it, the state archives. I requested it through a law firm in Helena, using a shell company not connected to Blackwood Holdings. Harold met her gaze directly. I've been gathering evidence against my father for 2 years, Clara. Ever since I found out what really happened to William. The silence that followed was charged with skepticism and unexpected possibility. Porter moved closer to examine the document, his banker's eye evaluating its authenticity. This looks genuine, he confirmed after a moment. It is, Josephine interjected. My husband authenticated the original before your father had it removed from the county records. She turned to Harold. What changed, Mr. Blackwood? What finally opened your eyes to your father's true nature? Harold looked at Clara, finding it both difficult and necessary to hold her gaze. I discovered that my father had ordered William's death, not as an accident or a regrettable necessity, but as a calculated elimination of a threat. His voice remained steady despite the emotion behind his words. William had arranged a meeting with the governor's environmental advisor. My father couldn't allow that to happen. Clara's posture stiffened. You've known this for 2 years and said nothing. I've been building a case, gathering evidence that would stand up in court that couldn't be dismissed as hearsay or circumstantial. Harold's voice took on an edge of urgency. My father has connections at every level of government in this state. Accusing him without irrefutable proof would be worse than saying nothing at all. And now, Clara challenged, what's changed that brings you here today? Harold said simply. Your return forced my father's hand. He's accelerating his timeline, taking risks he wouldn't normally take. The dam approval is scheduled for next week, and he's calling in political favors to ensure it passes regardless of environmental concerns. Porter interjected. He's ordered Reeves to find whatever William hid at Bloodstone Crossing. This information clearly surprised Harold. My father knows about Bloodstone Crossing. He knows William hid something important there, Clara clarified. We're not sure he knows exactly what. The original tribal water agreement, Josephine said quietly, drawing everyone's attention. William found it in a private collection in Helena, a document signed by the Blackfoot tribe and the first settlers establishing shared stewardship of the watershed in perpetuity. Clara's eyes widened. You knew about this? My husband told me before he died. William had shown it to him, hoping for legal validation of its significance. Josephine's expression clouded. The pressure from your father shortly after. The tribal agreement would supersede later territorial claims. Harold realized aloud. It would invalidate the water rights my father has been accumulating for 15 years and render the dam project illegal under federal law protecting indigenous treaties. Clara added, the full implications becoming clear. No wonder my father went to such lengths to protect it. A heavy silence fell over the room as each of them contemplated what this meant. The document William had hidden at Bloodstone Crossing wasn't just evidence of Blackwood's fraud, it was the legal foundation for reclaiming the valley's water from private control. We need to retrieve it before Reeves does, Porter stated the obvious. But Blackwood has the crossing under surveillance. It won't be easy to access. I can help with that, Harold offered. I know the security protocols, the patrol schedules, and I have full access to the property. Clara's expression remained skeptical. Why should we trust you? This could be an elaborate trap designed by your father. A fair question, Harold acknowledged, one I can't answer with words alone. He turned to Josephine. Mrs. Gray, do you still have the letters? The older woman nodded, understanding in her eyes. In my husband's study, he kept them in his personal safe. Letters? Clara looked between them, confused. From my father to Judge Gray, Harold explained, explicitly threatening his family if he didn't cooperate with certain property transfers. My father doesn't know I'm aware of their existence. And you're willing to use them against him? Porter asked, disbelief evident in his tone. I'm willing to see justice done, Harold replied, sounding more certain than he felt, even if it cost me my inheritance and my place in the valley. He looked directly at Clara again. I couldn't save your father. Perhaps I can help save what he died protecting. For the first time, Clara's expression softened slightly. Not forgiveness, it was far too early for that, but a tentative acknowledgement that Harold might be something more than his father's puppet. Where is Judge Vance? Josephine asked, suddenly noticing his absence. Creating a diversion to help us escape, Clara explained. Reeves found us at the cabin. Elijah stayed behind to confront him. Concern flashed across Josephine's features. Elijah has avoided confrontation for 15 years. Why change now? He said he had unfinished business with Reeves, Porter supplied. Something about setting the record straight. Harold's expression darkened. Reeves isn't someone you confront lightly. He's dangerous, especially when carrying out my father's directives. Then we need to find Elijah before Reeves does something permanent, Clara decided. He said he'd meet us here after dark. If he's able, Porter added grimly. Clara refused to consider that possibility. Judge Vance survived 15 years of self-imposed exile with your father's knowledge. He's more resourceful than he appears. For all our sakes, I hope you're right, Harold said, because we'll need him if we're going to challenge the dam approval. His testimony about the Reeves court-martial would establish a pattern of falsifying evidence that strengthens our case against the environmental impact report. The mention of the court-martial reminded Clara of a question that had been nagging at her since their conversation at the cabin. Harold, what was the connection between the military corruption Reeves discovered and your father's interest in this valley? It still doesn't make sense to me. Harold hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. During his military service, my father became involved with certain government projects related to water security. Classified work concerning aquifer access and control systems. His voice lowered. The defense contracts were the visible part of his business. The water acquisitions were the long game, positioning Blackwood Holdings to control a resource that will only become more valuable as climate change advances. He's creating artificial scarcity, Clara realized, manipulating supply to drive up prices, while presenting himself publicly as developing critical infrastructure for the common good, Harold confirmed, the perfect cover for consolidating control of a vital resource. Josephine, who had been listening intently, spoke with quiet conviction. William understood the full scale of Maxwell's ambition. That's why he reached out to the governor's office, why he was collecting evidence not just of local fraud, but of a systematic attempt to privatize water access across multiple watersheds. My father has similar operations in 3 other states, Harold admitted, always using local proxies, always hiding behind legitimate development projects. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. What had seemed like a local injustice was revealed as part of a much larger, more insidious plan, one with implications far beyond their small valley. We need that tribal agreement, Clara said with newfound urgency. And we need to get to Bloodstone Crossing before Reeves figures out exactly what he's looking for. I can get us past the security perimeter tonight, Harold offered. But we'll need to move carefully. My father will be watching for unusual activity, especially after what happened at the cabin. Clara turned to Josephine. Will you wait here for Judge Vance? Tell him where we've gone? The older woman nodded. I'll do more than that. I'll call some old friends from my husband's days on the bench. People who still believe in the rule of law, even when it's inconvenient for powerful interests. As they prepared to leave, Porter pulled Clara aside. Are you sure about trusting Harold? He's been part of Blackwood's machine for his entire adult life. Clara glanced at her former fiancé, seeing him with new eyes, not as the young man who had betrayed her trust, but as someone possibly seeking redemption in the only way available to him. I'm not sure of anything, she admitted, but my father believed in giving people the chance to do the right thing, even when their past suggested they wouldn't. She touched the journal in her pocket. Sometimes the people who have the most to lose by opposing injustice are the ones whose opposition matters most. Porter nodded, understanding her reasoning, if not fully agreeing with it. Just be careful. Desperation sometimes looks a lot like courage until the moment of truth arrives. I stopped being careless the day my father died, Clara assured him. Trust is earned, not given, even with former fiancés bearing peace offerings. As they joined Harold and prepared to leave, Clara couldn't help wondering about Elijah Vance. The retired judge had spent 15 years hiding from his past, only to confront it directly when she needed him most. She hoped his courage hadn't come at too high a price, because the truth they sought at Bloodstone Crossing wouldn't matter if there was no one left with the authority and credibility to ensure it was heard. Elijah watched from the cabin window as Reeves and his companion approached through the trees. The second man was unfamiliar, younger, less experienced, based on his movement patterns, likely local muscle rather than one of Blackwood's professional associates. The years had changed Reeves little, still medium height, medium build, with that forgettable face that had made him effective in intelligence work. Only his eyes betrayed his true nature, cold, calculating, constantly evaluating threats and opportunities. Eyes that had once looked up at Elijah from the defendant's chair, silently proclaiming innocence, while accepting that justice would not be served. Elijah had rehearsed this confrontation many times over 15 years, though he'd never truly expected it to occur. What did one say to the man whose life you had destroyed through a combination of ambition and willful blindness? What apology could possibly address such a fundamental wrong? He set his revolver on the table, clearly visible but not in his hand. Then he opened the cabin door and stepped onto the porch. Empty hands held slightly away from his body. Lieutenant Reeves, he called, using the military rank deliberately. It's been a long time. Reeves froze momentarily, then continued forward with increased caution. Judge Vance, I'd heard you were in the area. His voice was exactly as Elijah remembered it, controlled, neutral, revealing nothing. 15 years in the same small valley, yet we've managed to avoid each other until now. Quite an accomplishment. Deliberate on both our parts, I suspect. Reeves reached the clearing in front of the cabin, his companion hanging back slightly. Where are the others? Gone, Elijah said simply. Just me now. Harmon's daughter and the bank officer. Reeves glanced at the cabin's windows, clearly skeptical. Left about 20 minutes ago, though I suspect you already know that, given how carefully you were monitoring our meeting. A ghost of a smile touched Reeves' lips. Professional habits are hard to break, Judge, as I'm sure you've found in your retirement. The younger man shifted impatiently. We should search the cabin, make sure they're not hiding. They're not, Reeves said with quiet authority. The judge is many things, but he's not a liar. He studied Elijah with clinical detachment. Why stay behind? You must know why we're here. To eliminate potential complications before the dam approval, Elijah acknowledged. On Maxwell Blackwood's orders, just as you eliminated complications for Stratcorp 15 years ago. The mention of the defense contractor caused a barely perceptible tightening around Reeves' eyes. Ancient history, Judge. Not to me, and I suspect not to you either, Lieutenant. I haven't used that rank in a very long time. Yet you're still following orders, aren't you? Still the good soldier, even without the uniform. Reeves' expression hardened. What do you want, Judge Vance? Some kind of confession, absolution for your role in what happened to me? I want to set the record straight, Elijah said simply. I know the evidence against you was fabricated. I know you were framed because you discovered Blackwood's involvement with Ahmed Kabir. This information clearly surprised Reeves, though he masked it quickly. You knew even back then. I suspected. Received confirmation a month after sentencing, too late to help you, but early enough to haunt me for 15 years. Reeves was silent for a ring moment, processing this revelation. Yet you said nothing, did nothing. I resigned my commission, left the judiciary, tried to disappear. Elijah's voice carried the weight of accumulated regret. It wasn't enough, I know. Nothing would be. No, Reeves agreed coldly. It wouldn't. The younger man grew visibly uncomfortable with the conversation. We should get on with it, he urged Reeves. Blackwood wants this wrapped up before dark. Reeves ignored him, his focus entirely on Elijah. Why tell me this now? What could possibly change after 15 years? Because Clara Harmon deserves justice for her father, Elijah said, and because you deserved the chance to choose differently than I did when faced with Blackwood's corruption. A humorless laugh escaped Reeves. Choose differently. You think I have choices. Judge, he gestured at his companion. Blackwood owns me just as he owns this valley. The only choice I made was survival. There are always choices, Lieutenant. I learned that too late. Perhaps you don't have to. The sincerity in Elijah's voice seemed to reach something buried deep within Reeves. For a brief moment, his carefully maintained facade cracked, revealing the man who had once believed in justice and duty. They're going to Bloodstone Crossing, aren't they? Looking for whatever William Harmon hid there. Elijah neither confirmed nor denied this, but his expression must have revealed something. Blackwood already has men watching the crossing, Reeves continued. They won't find what they're seeking. Unless someone who understands Blackwood's security systems helps them, Elijah suggested quietly. Reeves' face hardened again. I'm not suicidal, Judge. And neither are you, despite this reckless confrontation. Not suicidal, Elijah agreed. Just tired of carving epitaphs for good people while the guilty prosper. He straightened his posture, decision made. I'm going to Bloodstone Crossing, Lieutenant. You can try to stop me or you can help me. But 15 years of silence ends today one way or another. The younger man moved forward, hand reaching inside his jacket. This has gone on long enough. Stay where you are, Carson, Reeves commanded without looking away from Elijah. The judge and I aren't finished. Something passed between the two older men, a recognition perhaps of shared history and parallel compromises. Elijah had sentenced Reeves to prison based on false evidence. Reeves now served the man who had orchestrated that injustice. Both had sacrificed their principles for reasons that had seemed necessary at the time. What would you do, Reeves asked finally, if our positions were reversed, if you were the one bound to Blackwood by circumstance and threat? I'd remember my oath, Elijah said simply. The one we both took to uphold justice no matter the personal cost. Reeves considered this, his expression unreadable. Justice is a luxury, Judge. Survival is a necessity. Yet here you stand alive despite everything Blackwood did to you. Perhaps it's time to consider what that survival is worth if it serves only to perpetuate injustice. Before Reeves could respond, the radio at his belt crackled to life. Team 2 to Reeves, movement detected at Bloodstone perimeter. Multiple subjects approaching from the east. Reeves grabbed the radio. Hold position. Do not engage until I arrive. He turned to his companion. Carson, get the truck. As the younger man jogged back toward the road, Reeves fixed Elijah with a penetrating stare. This isn't over, Judge. No, Elijah agreed. It's just beginning. For a moment, it seemed Reeves might say more. Instead, he gave a curt nod, not quite respect, not quite acknowledgement, but something between the two, and turned to follow Carson. Elijah watched them go, uncertain whether he had just spoken to an enemy or a potential ally. Either way, he had done what he could to plant seeds of doubt in Reeves' mind. Whether they would take root remained to be seen. What mattered now was reaching Bloodstone Crossing before Blackwood's men intercepted Clara and the others. The confrontation with Reeves had bought them time, but not much. Elijah retrieved his revolver from the table and a flashlight from the cabin's supply shelf. The journey to the crossing would take him across difficult terrain as darkness fell, a challenging trek for a man of 60 whose joints protested even moderate exertion. But physical discomfort was a small price to pay for the chance to finally take a stand that mattered. William Harmon had faced far worse in defense of the truth. The least Elijah could do was show similar courage now, regardless of the outcome. Outside, the lengthening shadows of late afternoon stretched across the clearing. Somewhere in the valley below, Maxwell Blackwood was preparing to complete his 15-year plan to control the region's water. At Bloodstone Crossing, Clara and her unlikely allies were seeking evidence that might prevent that outcome. And here, at a weathered fishing cabin on Miller Creek, a retired judge had finally found the courage to face his past and perhaps help shape a more just future. Elijah started down the trail, moving as quickly as his body would allow. The fate of the valley and his chance for redemption awaited at Bloodstone Crossing. Bloodstone Crossing lay in the heart of what had once been communal grazing land, where three ancient stones stood witness to centuries of human passage. The stones themselves were unremarkable, weathered limestone pillars about 5 feet tall, their surfaces stained by minerals that gave them a rust-colored appearance in certain lights, hence the Bloodstone name. What made them significant was their positioning at the confluence of two waterways and their status as boundary markers between territories. Clara, Harold, and Porter approached cautiously through the deepening twilight, keeping to the cover of cottonwood trees that lined the banks of the smaller stream. The evening air carried the scent of wild roses and sage, a combination that instantly transported Clara back to childhood fishing trips with her father. "Security patrol passes this section every 30 minutes, Harold whispered, checking his watch. "We have about 8 minutes before the next one." Porter, still struggling with withdrawal symptoms, wiped sweat from his brow, despite the cool evening. "What exactly are we looking for?" William never specified. "Something that wouldn't be obvious to Blackwood's men," Clara reasoned. "Something that would make sense only to someone who knew my father well." They reached the edge of the clearing, where the three stones stood in silent formation. The largest stone faced east toward the rising sun, while the other two created a rough triangle with approximately 15 feet between each pillar. At the center of this triangle, a natural depression had filled with water from recent rains, creating a small still pool. "My father used to tell me stories about these stones," Clara said, moving closer despite Harold's cautionary gesture. "He said the original agreement between settlers and natives required that any significant decisions about the valley's resources had to be witnessed by the stones." Witnessed by stones? Porter's skepticism was evident. "It wasn't literal," Clara explained. "It meant that agreements had to be made here, in this specific place, to be considered binding. A tradition that recognized the stones as impartial observers that would outlast any human witness." Harold scanned the perimeter nervously. "We need to hurry. My father's security system includes motion sensors along the main approaches." Clara circled the stones, studying each one carefully in the fading light. The eastern stone had various markings carved into its surface, some clearly native pictographs, others added later, by settlers to mark boundaries and water levels during historic floods. The other two stones were less elaborately marked, but showed signs of human modification over generations. "There," she said, suddenly kneeling beside the smallest stone. "This doesn't match the other carvings." Porter and Harold joined her, examining what appeared to be a series of notches, carefully carved into the stone's base, partially hidden by grass and soil. "They're numbers," Porter realized. "Coordinates, maybe." "No." Clara traced the pattern with her fingertip. "They're measurements, stream depth markers." She looked up at the others, excitement in her voice. "My father was a hydrologist before he took over the family farm. He measured water flow as a hobby, kept records for decades." Harold's expression shifted to recognition. "The basin survey. That's why my father could never find the tribal agreement." William hid it in the water data. "Not in the data," Clara corrected, rising to study the shallow pool at the center of the stone triangle. "In the water itself." Porter looked baffled. "How do you hide a document in water?" Instead of answering, Clara waded into the pool, which reached only to her calves. The bottom was lined with smooth stones of various sizes. She bent down, running her hands along the underwater surface until she felt something different, not a stone but metal. "Help me with this," she called. Harold joined her in the pool, following her guidance to grip the edge of what proved to be a small metal container, approximately the size of a lunchbox, embedded in the pool's bottom beneath several carefully arranged stones. Together they worked it free, the water running in rivulets down its stainless steel surface as they carried it to dry ground. A combination lock secured the lid, its mechanism showing no signs of rust despite its underwater storage. "Now what?" Harold asked. "We don't have the combination." Clara studied the lock, thinking. "My father would have used something I would remember." something significant to both of us. She tried several possibilities: her birth date, her mother's birth date, the year her mother died, all without success. Porter glanced anxiously at his watch. Security patrol will be coming through soon. Wait, Clara said suddenly. The measurements on the stone, they're not just depth markers, they're a sequence. She quickly knelt and recounted the notches, then applied the sequence to the lock. With a satisfying click, the mechanism released. Inside, wrapped in waterproof material, was a leather document case along with a sealed envelope addressed to Clara in her father's handwriting. She removed both with trembling hands just as Harold hissed a warning. Lights on the access road, someone's coming. Porter helped Clara secure the case inside her jacket. We need to move. Now. They retreated toward the tree line, moving as quickly as caution allowed. Behind them, vehicle headlights swept the clearing, illuminating the ancient stones in harsh artificial light. They've spotted the disturbed area, Harold whispered, glancing back. Water still settling in the pool. Clara clutched the document case to her chest, feeling her father's final message pressed against her heart. They had what they'd come for, but escape suddenly seemed far less certain than their approach had been. This way, Porter indicated a deer trail leading deeper into the woods. If we can reach Lopez Creek, we can follow it back to the road. Harold shook his head. They'll have the creek monitored. We need to split up, create confusion. He pointed north. Porter head that direction for about half a mile, then double back toward town. Clara and I will go west, then circle south. Clara started to protest, but the sound of voices from the clearing silenced her. Blackwood's security team had discovered the open container. Go, she told Porter. We'll meet at Josephine's. As the banker disappeared into the darkness, Clara and Harold moved carefully through the underbrush, each snap of a twig or rustle of leaves sounding impossibly loud in the quiet night. They're tracking us, Harold murmured after several minutes. Standard procedure, they'll call in additional teams to establish a perimeter. Your father's very thorough, Clara observed with grim humor. You have no idea, Harold replied, no amusement in his tone. We need to find better cover before they bring in the digs. The mention of tracking dogs added urgency to their movement. Clara followed Harold's lead as he navigated through increasingly dense forest, his familiarity with the property evident in his confident direction changes and awarenesses of natural landmarks. There's an old line shack about a quarter-mile ahead, he explained as they paused to catch their breath. Maintenance building for the irrigation system. It might give us temporary shelter while we figure out next steps. Clara studied his profile in the dim moonlight filtering through the canopy. You've been planning for this possibility for some time, haven't you? Harold's expression was difficult to read in the shadows. Let's just say I've considered various contingencies in case my father's methods ever became untenable. Yet you stayed all these years knowing what he was doing. Yes, the simple admission held no excuses or justifications. I stayed. The raw honesty in his voice caught Clara off guard. This wasn't the same Harold who had broken their engagement 5 years ago, with platitudes about family obligation and practical considerations. This was someone who had finally acknowledged his complicity in something deeply wrong and was choosing, however belatedly, to act. The shack is just ahead, Harold whispered, interrupting her thoughts. Stay low and move quickly when we reach the clearing. They emerged from the trees into a small, open area, where a weathered wooden structure stood silhouetted against the night sky. Harold led the way, producing a key to unlock the door and usher Clara inside. The interior was spare but surprisingly well-maintained, a small table with 2 chairs, a cot against one wall, a wood stove, and shelves holding various tools and supplies. Harold quickly closed the curtains before lighting a small battery-powered lamp. My private sanctuary, he explained, noting Clara's surprise at the cabin's condition. Somewhere my father doesn't monitor. How can you be sure? Because I maintain the security systems myself. This building isn't on the grid or the property maps. Harold moved to a cabinet, removing bottled water and passing one to Clara. We should be safe here for a while. Clara accepted the water, suddenly aware of her thirst after their cross-country trek. As she drank, her gaze fell on a framed photograph on the small table herself and Harold, from years earlier, standing by the very stones they had just visited. She remembered the day, a picnic to celebrate their engagement, before she had known anything about Blackwood's true nature. You kept this, she said, indicating the photo. Harold's expression softened. Some memories are worth preserving even when they're painful. The simple statement created a moment of unexpected connection between them, a brief acknowledgement of what had been lost when Clara discovered the truth about the Blackwood family's methods. "We should examine what your father left," Harold suggested, changing the subject. "If it's what we think it is, it could change everything." Clara removed the document case from inside her jacket, placing it on the table. The leather was old, but well-preserved, the kind of quality craftsmanship that had become increasingly rare. With careful movements, she opened the case and removed its contents, a folio of yellowed parchment, its pages covered in handwritten text and decorated with symbols that appeared to be tribal in origin. "The original agreement," Harold breathed, recognizing its significance immediately. Clara unfolded the document with reverent care. The opening lines were written in both English and what appeared to be the Blackfoot language. "This covenant between the people of the Blackfoot Nation and the settlers of Riverstone Valley establishes shared guardianship of the waters that give life to this land." The text continued, detailing specific rights and responsibilities for both native peoples and settlers, emphasizing the communal nature of water access and establishing protocols for resolving disputes. Most significantly, it explicitly prohibited any single entity from controlling access to the watershed. "This predates the territorial water rights by almost 20 years, Harold noted. "Under federal law, it would take precedence over later agreements, especially given the indigenous signatories." Clara turned to the final page where signatures and handprints recorded the assent of those present at its creation. Among the settler names, one stood out: Jeremiah Blackwood, representative of Eastern interests. "Your ancestor," Clara said, pointing to the name. Harold nodded grimly. "The family's founder in this region. My father always portrayed him as a visionary who recognized the valley's potential. It seems his vision included shared stewardship, not private control." Clara's tone held no triumph, only a sad recognition of how far the Blackwood legacy had strayed from its origins. She set the agreement in and picked up the envelope addressed to her. The seal broke easily, revealing several handwritten pages in her father's distinctive script. Clara began to read aloud. "My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, then what I feared has come to pass. I've discovered something that powerful interests would prefer remain buried, and my efforts to bring it to light have put me in danger." The document accompanying this letter is the original water covenant between the Blackfoot tribe and our valley's first settlers. Unlike later territorial agreements, it explicitly establishes water as a shared resource that cannot be owned or controlled by any individual or entity. It is, in essence, the founding constitutional document of our valley's relationship with its most precious resource. Maxwell Blackwood has spent years systematically erasing all record of this agreement while acquiring control of our water through manipulated property transfers and falsified rights claims. His ultimate goal is not merely wealth, but power, the power that comes from controlling something essential to life itself. I've confirmed that Blackwood's operations extend beyond our valley. He has similar schemes underway in watersheds across the western states, all concealed behind legitimate-seeming development projects. The dam he proposes here is part of a larger strategy to establish private control over regional water supplies in anticipation of increasing scarcity due to climate change. I've shared copies of my evidence with trustworthy officials in the state capitol, but Blackwood's influence reaches far. By the time you read this, he may have already neutralized those connections. There is one person in the valley who might help you, Judge Elijah Vance. Despite his reclusiveness, he understands Blackwood's methods better than most, having once been manipulated by them himself. The judge carries a burden of guilt over a military trial where Blackwood's influence led to a false conviction. That guilt has silenced him for years, but perhaps your cause might awaken his sense of justice. "I'm sorry to place this burden on you, my daughter. Know that whatever happens to me, my love for you remains as constant as the flow of water from mountain to valley. Like water, truth will find its way wearing down even the hardest stone over time. With eternal love, your father." Clara finished reading, her voice steady, despite the emotion the letter evoked. Harold remained silent, his expression a complex mixture of shame and resolve. "He knew," Clara said finally. "He knew exactly what would happen and made preparations anyway. Because he believed the truth was worth the risk," Harold replied quietly. "Just as you do." Clara carefully refolded the letter and returned it to its envelope. "This agreement changes everything. With proper authentication, it invalidates your father's entire water acquisition strategy, not just here, but potentially in other watersheds as well.